Today, we'll be taking a kind of time trip together, tracing the birth and childhood of the written word, this thing called literature. And for our purpose, we'll confine ourselves to literature as poetry and fiction. You know, a novelist once said that he wrote fiction because he felt that truth was more important than facts. In a way, we could say that the writers of literature have as their quest the discovery of truth beyond fact. And when they succeed in poetry or prose, they have created literature. Well, in our quest, we'll be doing some discovering or rediscovering, looking at and listening to the development of language, without which, of course, literature couldn't exist. Some early literature, from the classics of Homer to the immortal lines of the Bard of Avon, as well as more recent literature, including the Romantics, the Victorians, and finally, the moderns. But back to the beginning.
Man had not been very long upon the face of his earth before it became necessary for him to make some lasting record of his communication. Perhaps it was an urgent preservational need, or perhaps just the animalistic need to leave his mark. But in time, these marks, these petroglyphs or pictorial writings, became commonly understood among all the people of a given geographic area. The marks became symbols, symbols of things and of happenings, of ideas. And then the symbols of sounds, sounds related to those ideas. And the symbols changed, became simplified and differentiated and organized into an alphabet. Man had been speaking for some time before he could write, but now he could write down the sounds of his speaking by assembling his symbols, the letters of his alphabet. Man could write words, and words could be made into phrases and sentences according to the rules that had evolved in his spoken grammar. Homo sapiens at last had a written language. Now he could read. And when the writer used the written language to tell his readers a story, to lead them into some new insight beyond the mere facts, that was the beginning of literature.
Tell me, muse, of the man of many ways who was driven far journeys after he had sacked Troy's sacred citadel. Many were they whose cities he saw, whose minds he learned of. Many the pains he suffered in his spirit on the wide sea, struggling for his own life and the homecoming of his companions. Even so, he could not save his companions, hard though he strove to. They were destroyed by their own wild recklessness, fools who devoured the oxen of Helios, the sun god, and he took away the day of their homecoming. From some point here, goddess, daughter of Zeus, speak and begin our story.
The story of the Odyssey, one of the world's greatest epics and one of the earliest influences on Western literature. Its heroic flights of poetry are from the hand of Homer, a Greek, who, if he lived at all, wrote in the 8th or 9th century before Christ. Like Homer's other noted work, the Iliad, most early literature was of the epic variety, exciting adventure stories with archetypal heroes. For great literature is invariably about man, his tragedies, his comedies, only incidentally about his language, his gods, his cities, or his artifacts. The superhero held great cultural appeal even then, whether in those ancient classics of the Mediterranean, read in hand-copied manuscript only by the elite citizens, or in the later medieval legends composed far to the north and told by one generation to the next. Our English literature more or less began with this epic tale of Beowulf, which, though set in Denmark in the early 6th century, was probably composed in the 8th century and survives only as an Anglo-Saxon manuscript dated circa 1000. Its language, Old English, is hardly intelligible to us today.
monigum metum, Euro settle oftia
Lay of the
exorbi
spear
orlas,
Dane, full of the prowess of famous kings, deeds of renown that were done by the heroes. Skilled the sheep child from scourging foemen, from raiders a many their mead halls rested. He lived to be feared, though first as a waif puny and frail he was found on the shore. He grew to be great and was girt with power, till all the border tribes obeyed his rule. And sea folk hardy that sit by the whale path gave him tribute. A good king was he.
Still exciting, the story of Beowulf, prince and dragon killer unfolds much like that of a hero out of Homer, foreshadowing later children's fairy tales and even the modern fantasies of J.R.R. Tolkien. The ancient poets and minstrels recited their violent narratives of man as he knew himself in those days, a simple creature in the hands of fate, struggling toward a dusty, predetermined death. Along with the other arts, language continued to evolve, and literacy, if not yet middle class, was becoming more widespread. In 1066, the Normans conquered England, and with the French came their highly Latinesque language to mix with the rugged Anglo-Saxon. Old English became Middle English. Then across Europe there was a great Renaissance, an accelerated cultural growth, and with it the first great flowering of English literature. The medieval gloom dissipated by the sun of the Renaissance, man beginning to realize that the joys of this life are important too, as recounted in the immortal Canterbury Tales of Geoffrey Chaucer, a rich and humorous collection of stories mirroring the ornate society of the 14th century, with an intimation of a coming democratic impulse.
Befell that in that season on a day, in Zurich at the tabard as he lay, ready to wenden on me pilgrimage, to Canterbury with full devout courage, nicht was come into that hostoria, well neen and 20 in a compagnia of sundry folk be aventuri fala, in fellowship and pilgrims were they alla, that toward Canterbury Walden reader.
Of 9 and
But
20 people, all sorts of people who had met by chance, and all of them were riding toward Canterbury. But nonetheless, while I have time and space, before I pass on further in this tale, it seems to me in order to tell you all about each of them, as they seemed to me, and who they were, and of what rank in life, and also what they wore.
One of the three greatest English poets, with Shakespeare and Milton, Chaucer was truly a harbinger of humanism. His bawdy wife of Bath in the Canterbury Tales could easily stand as a patron saint of the feminine liberation movement.
Of course, most writers were still glorifying the heroes, but somehow they seemed more like men and less godlike. There was Robin Hood and Malory's King Arthur. Romantically noble, yes, yet with the foible and frailty of the common man, who was by now beginning to make his presence felt, economically and politically. He could even afford an occasional copy of one of the latest romances, hot off one of those newfangled printing presses of Herr Gutenberg and company. And among the more sophisticated courtly audience, the sonnet became a popular new poetic form, as penned by Elizabethans of the 16th century, Edmund Spenser, Ben Jonson, Sir Walter Raleigh, yes. The famous explorer was also a great lyric poet, and of course the greatest dramatist the world has ever known, a poet whose sonnets especially have never been surpassed.
My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare.
Had the Elizabethan age produced no other writer than William Shakespeare, it would still stand, as it undoubtedly does, as the greatest of all English literary periods. Actor, producer, playwright, and poet, his lines sing with rhyme and imagery. In this book, too, which achieved its ultimate literary stature with the royal richness of its King James translation into Elizabethan English for the masses, we find the perennial stuff of life, the love of man and woman.
I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. As the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters. My beloved is like a roe or a young hart. Behold, he standeth behind our wall. He looketh forth at the windows, showing himself through the lattice. My beloved spake, and said unto me, Rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. For lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing of birds is come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He feedeth among the lilies. Until the day break and the shadows flee away, turn, my beloved, and be thou like a roe or a young hart upon the mountains of Bether.
Following the Elizabethans came an age of reason, the neoclassic period, an era of intellect and curiosity, of exploration and discovery, not only in science and geography, but in literature as well. And by the 18th century, a new prose form, the novel, as we know it today, had become well established as the major popular literary technique, the literature of the people. From its birth in language and an epic infancy, through a half-poetic, half-prosaic adolescence, our literature was surely maturing, on its way to modern majority.
I suppose if there's one constant in literature, it's the proverbial one, change. In the beginning, the epic writings were like a string of short stories tied very loosely together by some invisible theme. But as the novel developed with its expanded reading public, there was a greater sense of unity and continuity, bringing to the work a feeling of oneness, of wholeness, a real beginning, middle, and end. And yet, it seems that there's something cyclic about literary periods. The Elizabethan period was a romantic age, one where the beautiful, the mysterious, the legendary were more important than the cold reason and logic of contemporary matters. And then, of course, the age of reason believed the imagination was an impediment to clear thinking and thus to be avoided. But inevitably, as all cultures do in overreacting to each other, the cycle recycled, and the 18th century brought us a new romanticism. It was a period of revolt, a real revolution in both Europe and America. There was a sudden birth of the democratic spirit, the sense of a personal, independent existence. And call it Neoplatonic intellectualism versus transcendental spiritualism or whatever. But the literary eye of the Romantic age saw the reality of the world not as the wheels and gears of science and reason, but more as the shadowy feelings of an emotional and possibly even divine universal truth. The literary quest had come round again, the idea that thinking breeds fact, but feeling leads to truth. But where do you find it, this romantic reality? Where else? In the midst of mighty nature, the great forests and deserted mountaintops.
Up, up, my friend, and quit your books, so surely you'll grow double. Up, up, my friend, and clear your looks. Why all this toil and trouble? The sun above the mountain's head, a freshening lustre mellow, through all the long green field has spread her first sweet evening yellow. Books, 'tis a dull and endless strife. Come hear the woodland linnet, how sweet his music. On my life, there's more of wisdom in it. Sweet is the law which nature brings. Our meddling intellect misshapes the beauteous forms of things we murder to dissect. Enough of science and of art. Close up those barren leaves. Come forth and bring with you a heart that watches and receives.
William Wordsworth was, with his friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the chief philosopher of the Romantic Age. The Romantics believed that man is good by nature, and that government, the state, corrupts him. Thus the farmer, the hermit, the primitive, away from the sophisticated society of the exploding cities, is better, more moral. And the theme of these old Romantics was reinforced by the new Romantics, Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and most importantly, John Keats, whose poetry seems almost crystallized music.
Do not all charms fly at the mere touch of cold philosophy? There was an awful rainbow once in heaven. We know her woof, her texture, she is given in the dull catalogue of common things. Philosophy will clip an angel's wings, conquer all mysteries by rule and line, empty the haunted air, and nomad mine, unweave a rainbow.
Keats died at 26, Byron at 36, and Shelley just short of his 30th birthday. It was as if some celestial stage manager wanted the stage cleared in time for the entrance of the Victorian age.
Victoria came to the throne in 1837 and left it in 1901. She reigned over a literary cycle which was often in reaction to the Romantic Age which preceded it, a sort of second age of reason, an age of increasing materialism and agnosticism, and yet not wholly so. It was an age of great conflict between head and heart, science and religion, thinking and feeling. The evolutionary theories of Darwin were in conflict with the spiritually inclined writings of poet laureate Lord Alfred Tennyson. The monster factories of the Industrial Revolution were prime targets for the sharp social pen of Charles Dickens.
A vast production line of diverse Victorian novels poured forth through the hands of the popular booksellers to a mostly literate public, thanks to the new reforms of free education for the masses. William Makepeace Thackeray, George Eliot, Thomas Hardy, and dozens more. Politically, economically, philosophically, it was a time of radical change and counterchange. A time whole hapless confusion is best summed up by perhaps the most intelligently creative yet sensitively strong man of the age, Matthew Arnold, in his Dover Beach.
Of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here, as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night.
And on the other side of that 19th century sea, the Atlantic, a new America was developing a literature of her own. American writing was a distinctive, if curious, mix of the English Gothic and the eternal Romantic, as reflected in the works of a multitude of novelists, and in poetry like Longfellow's Song of Hiawatha. Mostly it was a transplanted Victorian age, which strained to linger with the Romantics and paid only incidental homage to contemporary social commentary. Americans were mainly dreamers and doers, as opposed to thinkers and talkers. Walt Whitman typifies their literary mood of the 1800s.
When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, When I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountably, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars.
You know, it seems to follow that whenever a country dominates economically, politically, or militarily, its culture also becomes the most influential. Well, toward the turn of the century, the great British Empire was handing over the reins to the great American Republic, which had once been one of its colonies. And American fiction led literature into the 20th century with a realistic school of writing, life as it is, without idealism, subjectivism, or romanticism, a write only what you see and hear approach. And there was a school of naturalism, kind of a realism with built-in determinism. Man gets born, is thrown through life by blind forces over which he has no control, and then he gets clobbered. We can find examples of both schools in the works of Theodore Dreiser, Sherwood Anderson, Stephen Crane, Jack London, William Faulkner, and John Dos Passos. I'm afraid there's not much of my favorite lyric quality to be found in any of them. But then our fiction was being shaped by what was really happening around us.
World War I, the war to end war, the war to save democracy, the war that left a disillusioned generation. Ernest Hemingway was perhaps the greatest of our many literary expatriates. The war had proven itself to them to be as evil as that which it professed to fight. Many felt that the United States had become even more concerned with wealth and materialism than before, that their idealism had been misplaced. And yet through his works, one finds the development of a Hemingway code, a sense that the naturalistic universe outside of us is essentially meaningless. There are no objective values after all. We create our own, and if we live up to them, then the physical man can be destroyed, yet somehow remain gloriously undefeated in his destruction. Some overreacted to the war's frightening effect with an uninhibited party that lasted nearly 10 years, the Jazz Age, the Roaring Twenties. As Edna St. Vincent Millay put it, "My candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night. But oh, my foes, and ah, my friends, it gives a lovely light." Witness this description by F. Scott Fitzgerald in his finest novel, The Great Gatsby.
By 7 o'clock, the orchestra has arrived. Oh, no thin five-piece affair, but a whole pit full of oboes and trombones and saxophones and viols and cornets and piccolos and low and high drums. Oh, the last swimmers have come in from the beach down to dressing upstairs. The cars from New York are parked 5 deep in the drive, and already the halls and salons and verandas are gaudy with primary colors, and hair shorn in strange new ways, and shawls beyond the dreams of Castile. The bar is in full swing, and floating rounds of cocktails permeate the garden outside, until the air is alive with chatter and laughter and casual innuendo and introductions forgotten on the spot, and enthusiastic meetings between women who never knew each other's names.
Today, considered one of America's finest writers, Fitzgerald was seemingly buried for a time under scraps of Hollywood screenplays and sensational scandals, obscured by the crumbling ruins of the 30s Great Depression, which in turn gave rise to its own literary son, John Steinbeck, probably best known for The Grapes of Wrath, his topical naturalistic novel which evoked a responsive chord in the heart of an entire nation, an incandescent demonstration of how the novel at its finest can preserve, communicate, and keep forever alive truths that are smothered by the statisticians and embalmed by the historians.
The owners of the land came onto the land. They felt the dry earth with their fingers. The tenants from their sun-beaten dooryards watched uneasily. The owner men sat in the cars and explained.
You know the land's poor. You scrambled at it long enough, God knows. You know what cotton does to the land. Robs it, sucks all the blood out of it.
The squatters nodded. They knew, God knew. A man can hold land if he can just eat and pay taxes. He can do that.
Yeah, but you see, a bank or a company can't do that. Because those creatures don't breathe air. They don't eat side meat. They breathe profits. They eat the interest on money. If they don't get it, they die, the way you die without air, without side meat. It's a sad thing, but it's so. It is just so.
The truck shuddered and strained across the yard. They crawled up the little hill and the red dust arose about them.
Well, Ma tried to look back, with the body of the load cut off her view. She straightened ahead and peered straight ahead along the dirt road. Great weariness was in her eyes. People on top of the load didn't look back. They saw the house and the barn, and a little smoke still rising from the chimney.
And then the hill cut them off. The truck crawled slowly through the dust toward the highway and west.
In talking about this modern period of literature, we probably should have included novelists like Carson McCullers, James Baldwin, John O'Hara, Saul Bellow, Robert Penn Warren, and whoever else your favorite author may be, or poets like T.S. Eliot or E.E. Cummings. Each of them could show us a different reflection of our life and times. But perhaps that's what literature is really all about, a chance for each of us to explore each of them on our own, to make our own discoveries, find our own viewpoints, make our own choices, and through them create change in our future lives, our future world, our future literature. America's late poet laureate Robert Frost put it pretty simply. We've looked, and after all, where are we? Do we know any better where we are and how it stands between the night tonight and a man with a smoky lantern chimney? How different from the way it ever stood.